Great. Okay, everybody, welcome to what nobody tells you about co-ops, co-op boards, financials, and flip taxes. I'm Victoria Alexander, and I am the principal at Realty Collective, which has been in business for over 21 years. And I have my lovely associates, Amy Rose and Christine Wong, to go over the co-op process with you. So I'm gonna just kick it off with everybody giving an introduction. Amy, you want to go first?
Fantastic. So thank you, Victoria. I'm Amy Ruiz. I work at Citizens Bank, and I am working on financing for co-ops every single day. So I am going to help you with getting that together, so that you can get your commitment letter out, get your board package in, and get to the closing table. I've been with Citizens for 6 years. We are very active in the New York region. We are have a huge database of condos and co-ops that we lend in. And so it's a great resource to be able to kind of check buildings and see what different types of products they might qualify for. So I would love to be a help.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Christine Wong, a real estate attorney. I have been practicing in New York City for longer than I want to admit. But I currently own a co-op. I sit on the board of my co-op. I have owned and sold prior co-ops in New York City. So, in addition to representing buyers and sellers, I have actually lived through the process and I bring that insight with me when I represent buyers and sellers.
So Christine, I'm designated you as the expert on this panel. I've never owned
Oh,
in a co-op. Every time to me, it just seems, really crazy. So, okay, so I think that there's a lot of ambiguity around co-ops in New York City, and I think that this is a really important conversation for us to be having because do have their own language, and we're going to translate and break that down today, from it's the board package to recognition agreements to Aztec agreements and flip tax and maintenance versus common charges. Like there's just so much to unpack, and we're going to help you guys do that. And there's a chat right here. We're going to say put your questions here. And hopefully, if they're at the moment in time where it seems relevant for us to jump in, we'll just jump right into them, or else we can talk at the end. Hopefully, this is not going to take the full hour, and we're going to be able to cover a lot of basics, and then we'll leave it up for people to have conversation because I think you might have some dying, questions you want asked by, and it's so great to have all three of us here. You should take advantage of having our expertise to ask your deep dive. So, what we'll cover the difference between the two, a real cost comparison, there is some real hoops to jump through to get into a co-op. So I think, really understanding what a seller and a board is looking for. Um, so we're going to talk about SEMA, which is not going to be possible within co-ops, but will be for condos. And maybe you're a condo person. I am going to send out a co-op versus condo quiz afterwards to see if your personality type aligns up with what the different property types. And then we're going to go over commitment letters, the Aztec agreements, the board interview process, the closing checklist for both, and then take it from there. So let's see. What is the difference, really? Okay, so in one type of property, you are buying shares, right? Shares in an LLC, not necessarily, and signing a proprietary lease. In condos, you're actually buying real property. You're getting a deed, and there's not a lot of restrictions about what you can do. Obviously can't turn your condo into a nightclub, but you can do lots of other things that you're not going to be able to do in a co-op. So also there's no board approval for a condo. Co-ops, you have to get board approval. And that you're not paying tax in your monthly expenses because they're covered in your maintenance and the building is paying the tax for you. So you're just making one payment on a monthly basis. And I would say that, if you really want something with new construction with amenities, you're going to want to get into a condo. Co-ops, they're not making more of them. They're an old guard, New York City thing that has existed for a very long time, has taken big buildings and made it a pathway to home ownership. And I think that that's something that could really, we're not talking about it, but it could be addressing our affordability crisis right now. If we were taking properties that people wanted to own together, instead of just relying on the private market to be continuously building more new housing, we could make a pathway for, an affordable home ownership as well. So those are sort of the basic difference is at a high level of a co-op versus a condo. And we'll go over some of the other things, um, you know, and Anthony, thank you for joining. You missed the first intro where we said there's a chat right here. You can put your questions there, or at some point at the end, we're just going to jump right off, and you can chime on in and ask us your burning questions. And I'm so glad you're here. So, Amy and Christine, can you really outline the financial difference for us, for the co-op condo questions?
All right. Do you want to start, Amy, since the first bullet point is mortgage recording tax, and that's
Sure.
your spot?
Yes. Yep. So the mortgage recording tax is something that New York State collects on mortgages that are taken out on condos. It is not applicable to co-ops because it's not considered real property. Same thing with title insurance. With title insurance, that's for real property, and you are not paying that when you're buying a co-op. You are paying for what's called a lien search, which is similar. They're looking for liens against the shares of that you're holding, right? But it's not the same thing. It's much less expensive. It's usually under $500 for that lien search, as opposed to several thousands of dollars, depending on the price point for your co-op. So pretty significant savings when you take those two out of the equation. You are still subject to mansion tax if you are buying at a higher price point. So that is something to consider. Mansion tax is applicable to both condos and co-ops, but you're going to save a huge chunk on the mortgage recording tax and title insurance when you're buying a co-op.
Yes. And flip taxes. Flip taxes are a device created by co-ops to basically collect a fee at closing. It's not really a tax, it's a flip charge. And it's usually imposed upon a seller. The amount varies from co-op to co-op. Sometimes it's a percentage of the sale price, sometimes it's a percentage of your profits, sometimes it's a price per share. So if you own 100 shares, and it's $1 a share, then it's $100. Now, condos have gotten hip to the idea that they could also collect an additional fee at closing. So they decided to call it a transfer fee. That's how they've rebranded the flip tax. And again, it could be a flat fee. It could be, a percentage based on profits. It's usually a flat fee, but again, it varies from building to building. Part of my due diligence when I represent a buyer is to find out what those fees are so you have an idea moving forward how your building operates and what you might be responsible for when it comes time to sell. If you are selling, we will confirm these numbers. They're going to get put into the contract so everyone knows what to expect.
And I'm gonna send a little. I want to ask you, Christine, first is are these funds used for?
Um, it goes into either the building's reserves or their operating account, depending on what they do. It usually goes into the reserves.
So this is
And
something really
they,
that's then used to be reinvest back into the building. So they're like, oh, this person's exiting. We might as well penalize them and help us
well,
build our coffers up a little
it,
bit.
it's not really a penalize. It's, it's kind of it's your exit fee. And the idea is if there's a lot of turnover in the building, they want to keep costs down, and there are a lot of costs um on the board and on their management company in processing sales. On the other side of things, if you are intending to be a long-term owner, any income or revenue realized from a transfer fee or a flip tax offsets any maintenance or common charge increase or assessment that you're going to be imposed for ongoing maintenance and projects in the building.
I
And
realized I'm
I
on mute.
don't,
Sorry, go
yeah,
ahead.
and I don't know if it's the next slide, but we went ahead and put together sample lien search bills and title bills so you can kind of see what some of the charges and the breakdowns are.
Right.
So, like Amy said, a lien search is usually less than $500, and it's a one-time charge. They're going to pull, you have a title company pull the public records to see what liens and judgments are recorded.
Right.
A title bill is a little more complicated, because they're running all those searches, but there's also title insurance, the mortgage recording tax, all of that gets reflected in a title bill.
We're going to go into that after we decide, even if you want to go down this path. And I'm going to send a resource out tomorrow in the follow-up, a little bit about how you could calculate what part of your maintenance on a co-op that is tax deductible. Back of the napkin, real estimates here for that calculation I give you, and you'll need to check with your financial advisor, your accountant to verify those numbers. But I think that's one of the reasons that I think that people really feel that that's co-ops are better for them. So next slide is we're going to go over, okay, so you've decided you want to buy a co-op. Then you really need to understand what a seller in a co-op and what a board in a co-op is looking for to make sure that they're going to get to yes for you. Because at the end of the day, they are the ones that rubber stamp this and let you move forward, not a bank, right? Okay, so what do the board and the seller, while they're considering your offer, like to see? They would like to usually see 2 years of post closing liquidity of the maintenance. So that means after you cannot empty out every single bank penny out of your bank account to be able to purchase this co-op, because they want to see that you have money for a rainy day fund in case something happens, that you're going to be able to still be able to pay your maintenance. So that's one thing to consider. They also will look at your debt to income ratio. In Brooklyn, it's a lot lower. I would say that, more around 25%, but in Manhattan, they want to see around 30%. And so that means that all the debts that you have, so if you're paying student loans and you have a car payment, cannot exceed a percentage of your income, this percentage of your income. And the bank has a much higher number for that. So even though the bank's going to give you the loan, that doesn't mean a co-op board is going to approve you and let you move into their building, because they're looking for fiscally responsible people to be business partners with. Because at the end of the day, you guys are buying shares in a corporation and you guys are mini business partners here. They're working to make sure you have a successful business. And that means you want to have people that are reliable, and stable, and are going to pay their bills, and also going to be not that's they just don't want financial stability, they want mental stability too. That's why there's an interview process to make sure that you're somebody that has similar values to what the building has. So that's just something to keep in mind. And before we even move to the next steps on that, for putting in the offer and getting to the board, a seller wants you to show them that a board's going to say yes to you. So not only do you put in a regular offer with the revenue submit offer form, a lot of the brokers are going to ask us also to fill out a financial statement that really outlines all of your debts and all of your incomes and all of your assets, so that they can, from a high level, even though you have that pre-approval, high level, see that a board is going to say yes to you, because it's a big deal if you get all the way through, you sign the contracts, you get the commitment letter, you submit your board application, and then they say no. Nobody wants to go through that process. So they want some assurance that you're going to be able to get to the closing table, and that means passing the board interview and board approval. So that's something you have to take into consideration. Amy, is there anything you want to jump in here on?
I think you covered it well in terms of just, laying the groundwork for the fact that the board, has stricter requirements from the bank. So I think it's really important, to have that discussion when you're looking at co-ops with your loan officer. Hey, what is my debt to income ratio? I would also just say that the calculation is made off of your gross income. So not after your taxes are taken out, not after your, healthcare deductions and those sorts of things. So when you're running those calculations, on your own, just understand that that's coming out of your gross. And also sometimes there are income streams that will not count for the bank that do count for the co-op, and vice versa. So it's just really important to work with both Victoria and myself, to make sure that, everyone is sort of in agreement with what those debt to income ratios, are going to to look like and how they'll hold up for the board.
Thanks. Okay. So now we're going to talk a little bit about um, a different part of the mortgage process. I'm going to let Christine and Amy jump right into it.
Sure. So one of the things that um, you can do depending on the numbers, and Amy can speak a little bit more about the numbers, is to do a SEMA mortgage, which is a consolidation extension modification agreement. And basically, if you're going to, let's say, borrow 500,000 and the seller has a $300,000 outstanding mortgage, you can offer to assume that 300. And what that does is it helps reduce the mortgage tax, and it also sometimes helps reduce a little bit the transfer taxes. Um, what commonly happens is that the parties agree to split the savings, to be fair, because it's really more of a benefit to a buyer than a seller, but you want to induce a seller to, cooperate with you. So, what you'll often see is that the parties agree to split all expenses and to split all savings. Um, a SEMA is a little bit more of a complicated process than your everyday traditional mortgage. It takes a little bit more time. So if you are looking to close very quickly, SEMAs are not a good idea. But if you have, an extra 30 days or so, it can really save you money, again, depending on how much your loan is and how much the seller's loan is. Keep in mind, however, that the bank's attorneys will charge an additional fee um, to do a SEMA because it's a lot more paperwork and there's a different analysis. And, depending on the other attorneys involved in the deal, there might be additional fees on those ends as well. And that will all be offset again by any savings if everyone agrees to it. But if this is something that you want to consider, it's important to make a note of it and raise it at the outset of the process. You don't want to have entered into a contract and be halfway through getting a commitment letter and then say, hey, maybe I should try a SEMA, because to change course midstream will certainly add a lot of time and it will become a little bit more difficult for everyone to kind of switch gears, and Amy can kind of explain how the process is different from the bank side.
Yep. So that's one of those things that I always look for when I'm doing, and I don't think that I think Victoria might have specified this in the beginning, but I'm just going to reiterate. SEMAs are not applicable to co-ops because you're not paying the mortgage tax on co-op shares. So this is only for condos. Condos, typically, because there's not usually that board interview process, you are usually on a little bit of a quicker time frame. So it's really important, like Christine said, that at the outset you let everyone know, hey, we are closing with a SEMA. Everyone's agreed. Your attorneys have run the numbers with the seller's attorney to make sure that it, in fact, mathematically makes sense to go through the process, that everyone is going to end up saving money, right? Because it by the time you've paid the fees and stuff, it really needs to make a meaningful difference to both you and the seller in order to make it worthwhile. Typical processing time is depending on the seller's mortgage holder in their bank. It can be very, very quick depending on the bank. It can also take a really long time. So we usually advise people 8 to 12 weeks from start to finish. So that can be, your 60 to 90 days, whereas sometimes a co-op you could, or excuse me, a condo you can close as quickly as 45. So just keep that in mind when you're trying to, let your lender know right from the beginning.
You muted yourself, Amy. There you
Oop, I'm sorry, my fingers on the button. So, so what we are doing with the SEMA is it's actually a physical like document that is procured from the seller's mortgage and transferred over to yours and applied to yours. So it is that's part of what takes such a long time is actually the physical document takes a while. So those are kind of the biggest considerations that you want to make. And then Also, a lot of lenders only work with specific attorneys to process their CMAs. So that's also important for them to know when they're, assigning the bank work and the bank's attorney assignments, to make sure that they've given it to someone who can actually process the CMA. So just really important to flag up front, if you're interested while it's being negotiated, and make sure the math makes sense, and then that it gets into the hands of the right people to get it started right away.
Okay, next slide. Looks like it's you ladies again.
Fun, fun, fun.
Well, how about I do a little lead in? Okay, so your offer is accepted, okay? And we are now working with the bank. And the first thing I always tell her after offer is accepted is you're doing everything possible to get the bank all of the information they need, because we could not submit your board package for a co-op until we get the commitment letter and the Aztec agreement. So your focus is, oh, everybody wants to work on the board package. Like, okay, no, first we need to get everything to the bank. Then once the bank is satisfied and they're working on everything, then we can start working on your board package, because we want to align the board package being ready with the commitment letter, and the Aztec agreements. We don't have this timing lineup, for condos. You still have to get the bank everything, but it's a lot shorter timeline. And if you still have to get them everything and then get your commitment letter before we can close. But a lot of people aren't ready to close. The bank needs some time to do this. So it's just easier to focus on the co-op part of it, in my mind, because the condo it's just going to close as soon as the bank is ready. So I'm going to hand it off to Christine and Amy to talk about what this looks like from the commitment and Aztec side of it for the co-ops, and then talk a little bit about condos here.
Sure. So like Victoria said, the commitment letter you need as part of your co-op application. So it will be in the contract, and I go over it in terms of the timeline. The receipt of that from Amy is what triggers the next steps in terms of the application. The commitment letter is very happy. It's basically saying, "Hi, I'm the bank. I love you," and we're always all happy to get it. The Aztec agreements are also what's known as recognition agreements. Um, those are documents that the bank signs, and it's to notify the co-op, and it's for the co-op to acknowledge, and you as the borrower to acknowledge that, yes, there's going to be a loan on this property, and that everyone knows that the lender has certain rights and responsibilities. In the olden days, back when everything was paper and analog, you actually included your Aztec or recognition agreements with your co-op application. You would have a nice stack of paper because you've printed everything out, including these agreements. Now everything is online. So what happens, or most of the time it's online. There are still a couple of holdout co-ops that want paper. But what happens is you're going to scan a copy and submit it digitally. Then you need to hold on to your recognition agreements for the entire duration of the co-op application process. And when it comes time to close or schedule closing, I'm going to say to you, "Hi, do you remember the FedEx you got from the bank? Anything from 30 to 45 days ago? I need you to dig up those documents. And now we're going to send them to the co-op or managing agent, because the co-op is finally ready to sign. Now that they've reviewed your application and they've approved you and we're ready to close, they're finally going to sign that document." So I always ask my clients, please hold on to that. But if something happens and these documents disappear, luckily the bank's attorneys will be able to generate new ones and we'll be able to send them. But we do need them at closing, and we do need original copies, and everyone has to sign the same original copies. DocuSign is not acceptable for certain loan documents and closing documents, and this is one of them because it's a pretty key document.
Anything else to add, Amy, there?
I would just say, just a couple things that I want to add. So like Victoria said, you in the very beginning, like once you've got your contract is signed, you've wired your deposit funds, the the very next step before you dig into your board package, although you are going to work on that simultaneously, you're going to get everything to your loan officer, right? We're going to go through and we're going to scrub your file down and we're going to look for every little thing that we can to make sure that you get what we call a clean commitment letter. The commitment letter is the bank's approval. It is their commitment to making the loan. And that they've approved you for. It's going to come with something called conditions. Conditions are, that you have to take out homeowners insurance, for example, that you need to source a deposit, things like that. And so those are the things that will come out as conditions that you need to do between getting that approval letter and closing. But the commitment letter, once everyone knows that you have been officially and formally approved for the loan, that is the next step, and that's when usually it's 3 days. So you have, once you've given your loan officer all of your documents and they're satisfied and they've submitted it to underwriting, you're going to sit in an underwriting queue for, 5 days, 7 days, something like that. And that's how long it takes for an underwriter to pick it up, look it over, go ahead and stamp it with the approval, get any clarifications that they need, any additional supporting documentation in order to issue that commitment letter. Once the commitment letter is issued, you have usually only 3 business days to get your board application submitted. The Aztecs are going to, at least for my bank, they go out the very next day after your commitment letter. We deliver them via FedEx. They are triple originals, so you're going to get 3 copies. They're all signed by the bank. You're going to add your signature, and then, like Christine said, some co-ops will take them with your board package, but since everything's digital now, more and more, you're the one hanging on to them. So I always tell people, like, please put them in your underwear drawer. Do not lose them, because it will delay closing if you have lost your documents and you need them reissued by the bank. And usually that comes up like within 24 hours of closing. So just tuck them someplace very, very safe. And that I think that, Christine, you've covered pretty much everything else that I would have said. But the Aztecs are a very critical document, because they are that agreement between you as the buyer, and shareholder, and the co-op and the bank, just understanding that those shares have a mortgage against them. So.
I like that you guys said the olden days, like before 2020. Okay. So
It feels like the olden days, doesn't it?
yes, yes.
Yes.
I want to make sure we give time for people to ask questions. So I'm just going to quickly go through the board interview, right? Okay, so finally, we get your board package together with your commitment letter and your Aztec agreements. And sometimes we send them digitally through a platform like Domicile, or sometimes people still make me print out like the 300 pages and send it in 3 copies. It depends if the board, and it is not a reflection of this is a good or a bad co-op. It is a reflection of them prioritizing, making, streamlining things and the size of it and their management company and so many things. Some people are just antiquated and they have other things going on and they're not changing their system just to the sake of changing it. So there's 2 pathways, the digital or the non-digital. And so once they review everything, usually their management company, if they have one, reviews it first and flags anything for them, and then it goes to the board. Then the board reviews it. Sometimes they will let you know, hey, we have the privilege of telling you that this will take us 4 weeks to respond to. And sometimes they get back to you in 2 or 3 days, right? Depends on how active the board is and what they, are going to only meet with you during their scheduled meetings and things like that. So having them lay out the expectations helps quell your nervous system to know that like any day now we'll be hearing, or okay, I have some time to do this. So I always encourage people to do bar rules. Do not talk about religion. Do not talk about politics. Come in like business casual. Hopefully some places now do it via Zoom. Sometimes it's still in person. But be dressed up that you're taking this seriously. Don't show up in jeans and a t-shirt, right? Like, but not as intense as like a job interview, or a wedding, right? So somewhere in between. Make sure that you guys if it's just you, no issues, but make sure you and whoever you're applying with are on the same page about who's going to talk about what. I think that's an important. Don't make jokes. You think that you're funny. you think that everybody understands sarcasm because we're in New York City, don't make any comment that could not be taken by the wrong person that doesn't understand satire or New York City dark humor, and just don't make any jokes. So, and then I think it's important to ask don't badmouth the seller, right? Or the broker or anybody that's part of the process or the management company. Don't say a bad thing about anybody, even your old landlord. Everybody is a saint in your mind. And you want to keep it short and sweet. If they don't ask you the question, do not offer up information freely. People like to be chatty, be warm, but don't start being like, hey, and my mom once, gave me a baby turtle as a gift. I don't know, some cockamamie thing. Like, just stick to the program. Nice, polite, straightforward. So, and don't push for an answer at the board interview. So that's the board interview. Don't be scared. These are other human beings. Just, you have to know your audience. And since you don't know a lot about your audience, stick to the script. Okay, now is the time we're doing to do this deep dive, or not deep dive, overview of this, because I think that people are interested in understanding the financials here, and I'm going to let Christine and Amy dig in here.
Sure. So the first screen you're looking at is an estimated title bill for if you were buying a condo for 1.5 million and you were taking out a loan for $1 million. So we just tried to use round numbers to give you an idea. One-time fees include the title policy, that's the first number you see, and then the lender's policy. When you get a loan, you need to provide title insurance to your bank for the amount of the loan, which is different and less than your total purchase price. And then there are a lot of fees that are pass-through fees for a title company because they're going to pay the recording tax. They're going to pay filing fees. You have to, pay to record your deed. You have to pay to record the mortgage. And so all of those fees get passed through. New York State charges a recording fee for one of their forms. So that gets added as well. But if you look at the very bottom of the left-hand side where it says other charges, those are your actual title searches. So when I say that there's going to be a search of all the public records to see what liens and judgments there are, it's those searches. And that's what everyone uses, your bank, the seller side, to make sure that everything is clear and clean for your purchase. As you can see from this, there are also transfer taxes that are generally the responsibility of the seller, as well as the lender's quarter point. And then I'll let Amy talk about that and the recording tax a little bit more.
So, I think that we have, sorry, I'm like getting very close to my screen to be able to see the font. So, what we are, okay, so I already addressed the fact thank you, Victoria, my old eyes. We did discuss the mansion tax and how that is going to be applicable, regardless of whether you are buying a condo or a co-op, right? And then you have the, state mortgage tax. So it is a progressive tax. So when you're buying at 1 million price point from 1 to 2 million, it's it's X percent. And then when you go from 2 million, it's X percent. And then when you go 3 million up, it's X percent. So it does stagger and change. You're paying proportionally more because they figure you're buying at a higher purchase price. So they're going to tax you at a higher increment. So that's just something to keep in mind that it's not just this static number. It is going to fluctuate depending on the purchase price of the property. And the other thing that I want to call out is when you are refinancing, and this is one of the things that makes it much cheaper to refinance a co-op as opposed to a condo. When you refinance, you are getting all of this title work done again. And so that's something that is really important to keep in mind that you are going to have to pay for that title work again. So in this example, you're looking at like about $7,000, give or take a little bit, in terms of what the title insurance is going to cost you. You are not paying for the mortgage tax again. You are going to do a SEMA with yourself. A lot of times it is, well, and I should say you're going to do a SEMA with yourself with your own bank if you are using your own bank. If you are shopping around and using another lender, not every lender is going to be willing to transfer that to another bank. So that is a really important thing to know when you are buying a condo to understand if, we're in sort of a higher rate environment. Hopefully we have an opportunity to refinance, but it's something that you want to take into consideration when you're picking your lender. Are they going to, work with another lender, or are they going to make you basically stay in house to refinance, because then they've kind of got you in terms of you're either repaying the mortgage tax or you're taking whatever rate they're willing to give you on that refinance. So it's just something that is important to consider when you are buying a condo.
And
And
what's
if we go
the,
to the next slide, it's much easier. Um,
Jeez.
this is what your invoice looks like if you're buying a co-op and there's a lien search. There's just the one line item. And I get the report. That's it.
It's, yeah,
So it's
very
a
big
lot
difference.
less explanation. Yeah.
is there a percentage that you guys use for co-ops and condos to say for closing costs, like 1% of for a co-op? And I'm just asking, trying to make conversation.
I don't give percentages because there's been so much variation and change.
Mm.
Um, like I said, now that condos realize they can offer, impose a transfer fee, like everything has really kind of fluctuated. There are closing fees for if you're in person for a co-op, then there's the special extra remote closing fee. I mean, there's just
I'm trying to
Yeah.
like
so
make it
case by case.
accessible for like layman's. Like, okay, back of the napkin, if I want to buy a co-op under $1.45 million, what is should I try and keep in mind that I'll need for closing costs, right? Like what's the like you're giving some guidance saying it's a huge range, like help people understand like what they really need to have so they can see if they can move forward.
I'm willing to go out on a limb on a
Yeah.
co-op. I won't do it for a condo. But I can say like as a very, I mean that's like the reality of it, right? Because the condos can fluctuate so greatly.
But you can say
As
4 to 8%. I mean, that's it's a big
yeah.
range, but it's a
Oh,
range,
right.
right?
Yeah.
Right? You
Yeah.
don't have to give a specific
Yeah.
number. You can say there's a range. You should calculate between 1 and 3% for co-ops, 4 to 8%
Mhm.
for condos.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I mean, I think one of the biggest variants in terms of when you're closing with a co-op is that you have to factor in that prepaid interest piece, and that can move the needle a little bit in terms of like what your actual closing costs are and whether or not you're buying down your rate. But assuming that you're not, you can assume that it's going to be a little over 1,000 per 100,000 that you're borrowing. So if you're buying like a $500,000 co-op, your closing costs are going to be between $5,000 and $6,000 all in. It's very inexpensive from that standpoint. I always tell people that it's cheap to buy a co-op, it's expensive to sell because that's when you're typically picking up the flip tax. But hopefully you're in a better position when you're leaving. And so, but just as a very, very general rule of thumb, that's what I'll advise people.
Thank you. And so now we will move on to the closing checklist. I only have one piece in this, ladies, so jump on in.
Okay, perfect. So I'll just hop in really quickly. So we talked about when you get your commitment letter that it's got conditions on it. And every document that you have submitted, and keep in mind, a co-op in the city is going to close, on sort of a 90 to 120 day time frame, depending on sometimes your board doesn't meet during the summer, in August or things like that that are, can really lengthen your process. Every document has a shelf life. They're usually 90 to 120 days. So depending on when you gave me your pay stubs, was it part of your pre-approval? And then you found your place like 2 months in. And so that's already aged 60 days when we get started, right? So there's sort of this rolling list of expiration dates that we have in terms of, your bank statements, your pay stubs, if you're getting a gift, we have to paper trail all of that very strictly. Every document has its own, your credit report. If I pre-approved you and it took you 2 months, that credit report has 120 day shelf life. If we're kind of on that 90 to 120 day track, it might be expired before we hit the end, so we don't have to repull credit. So there's a lot of, so that's going to be our job to communicate to you, hey, like we're going to need this, this, and this updated prior to closing, along with your conditions. So just making sure that we are keeping all those documents fresh while we're waiting for your board interview. And then typically once you're approved by the board, and they give you your happy news, like, great, welcome to the fam. It's going to be about at least 2 weeks from that approval until your closing date, because you've got a lot of people that you are getting in the room, and it's a lot of people's schedules to coordinate. Um, and it's very rare that, like, that you're gonna get approved and like close like a couple days later. That pretty much doesn't happen. So just to set expectations in terms of like what that timing is gonna look like. You will need your own homeowner's insurance policy 99% of the time. So we'll work with you on that to kind of let you know what the minimum dwelling coverage is and all those sorts of things. Largely, you're covered by the co-op's master policy. So you really are just kind of walls in terms of what you're required for your insurance. And then, of course, you want to insure your contents. And then I'll flip it back to you, Victoria.
Oh, and then we're doing the final walkthrough. And that means that you've gotten the clear to close from the bank and everybody has scheduled the closing, and we're going to be having the closing within the next 48 hours. And so what we do is we go to the property to make sure all the stuff is moved out, but that also that nothing has broken or been damaged since you first saw the apartment. So we're going to check all the outlets. We're going to check all that the dishwasher's working, that the refrigerator is working, all of those sort of things, that you're not seeing any leaks, that the heat and the AC still work, even if it's hopefully it's in between seasons, like summer's the hardest and the winter's the hardest to check the opposite. So it's great if we're doing a spring or a fall closing. So we're going in there and signing up. If something comes up, we're either asking them to resolve it or give us a credit. And so then then I email the lawyers and say, hey, great, we went there, everything's perfect, ready to move forward, so that they don't have to then add something, because if we were negotiating, they have to add it to the contract. So go ahead, Christine, right?
Yes. So while you're planning and conducting your final walkthrough, I should have already given you a final closing statement. I've pulled numbers from the co-op or condo. I've talked to Amy and figured out what all the bank's numbers are. And I'm going to give you a final statement that lets you know what checks, what wires you need to bring or send at closing. And then, like Victoria said, if something comes up in the final walkthrough, if there's going to be a credit, I will coordinate with the seller side in terms of what that will look like. Are we sending less money or bringing less money to the table, or are they cutting a check for us? Some of that will depend on what checks I've asked the bank to bring, and what seller's attorney has in escrow that they can use towards, cutting us a check, depending on the nature of what came up at the final walkthrough. One thing that has been coming up a lot is requests that funds be sent through wires. So everyone's bank and everyone's bank account is a slightly different setting. Um, and you may be able to wire more or less. If you have most of your funds with online banks like Ally Bank and there's no standalone branch, it will be difficult for you to get bank checks if you need them. So we'll have to have a conversation, usually about a week or so before closing, ideally right after board approval, where we talk about what things look like on your end in terms of how much time you may need to either transfer things to a brick and mortar branch so that we can get bank checks, or make arrangements to be able to send wires, and coordinate that in time. Um, I'll probably ask you to call your bank and just verify how much you can send, what limits there are, what requirements they have, because likely you'll be sending wires to someone or someones that you've never sent before, and that usually makes banks a little bit unhappy and nervous. So we want to give them as much heads up and say, this is totally safe. We're buying a beautiful co-op or condo. but they're making us pay for it. And that's why, we're doing what we're doing. Um, and then day of closing will be fun time. You're going to show up with the bank checks that I've asked you to bring, and or proof that you've sent wires. You're going to have valid photo ID. Um, Sometimes if a co-op is pretty stuffy, I'm going to ask you to bring proof that you have homeowners insurance. Um, and then I'm going to make you sign your name a million times. There are some pretty big stacks of documents. A co-op will have their own category of documents. The bank will have their own category of documents. Seller will bring transfer tax documents. And, sometimes if we're doing a SEMA or if seller has a complicated payoff, there might be a little bit more, or if seller doing a 1031 exchange. Um, but the vast majority of the closing documents you have already seen before. So that's the good thing. It should not be too much of a surprise, right? The interest rate hasn't changed, all the names haven't changed. I will be with you at closing. You will not sign anything that I have not looked at already and reviewed. And everyone will be there. So there will be a representative from the bank. If we have questions, we can ask that person as well. There should be a representative from the co-op. So if we need to ask them, if a correction needs to be made, they're there as well.
Okay, I think that because we have 6 minutes left and we have a couple
Mhm.
people here, before we do this, because this is so way down the line,
Yeah.
ask if people have questions before we talk about this, because I want people, I know I want to respect everybody's schedule and time. So, and I want to give you an opportunity to ask us, the experts, anything you want about real estate, but specifically co-ops and condos for today. Come on, jump off mute. You don't need to ask it in the chat. You have a real estate broker, a mortgage broker, and a lawyer here to pick our brains. So please, you joined this class for a reason. Let us know what that reason is, and if we answered your questions today, or if you have something still you want to jump in. Anthony, Madeline, anything? Okay, I'm going to let Amy talk about reading your closing statement. But
Okay, perfect. So your closing disclosure, you are going to get it 3 days, at least 3 days prior to closing. That is a mandatory, federally mandatory waiting period. So that allows you to preview all of the stuff that you're going to sign and then ask all of the necessary people whatever questions you may have. So it's going to line up with everything that you're going to get so many different disclosures throughout the loan process. It's going to line up with everything that you have probably already seen a million times. But these are the final numbers. So you want to, take an extra few minutes and just look at it again. It's going to tell you, what is your interest rate, monthly payment, whether or not you're escrowing. Typically, if you're a first-time home buyer, you will be. For co-ops, you're really only escrowing that homeowner's insurance. It will specify what has been paid or not paid prior to closing. So typically you're going to pay your homeowner's insurance premium prior to closing, and you're also going to pay your appraisal fee prior to closing. Everything else is generally collected at closing. The cash to close is how much you are either bringing in form of a bank check or a wire transfer. A lot of times we will, give the number to the attorneys, and your attorney might pad that number just a little bit to cover any overages. If they don't, then you might want to bring a personal checkbook, is kind of best practice just to cover any sort of last minute little changes at the table, like something maybe that came up in the walkthrough, things like that, where there's minor adjustments since we balanced, 3 or 4 days ago. Prior to closing, sometimes there's just little things that pop up in that final closing package, that might alter the numbers. So either pad the wire or your check, and then those funds will come back to you in the form of a check, at closing. Or bring a little checkbook just in case you're not getting cut back. Disclosures, you want to understand what your grace period is. You want to understand, how much they're collecting ahead in escrow. Usually it's 2 months. And then whether or not your mortgage is assumable, typically you are only going to be able to assume, ARMs. And and then there's never, at least for my bank, there's never any prepayment penalties, and it's really not so much a thing anymore, really across the industry. But always do keep
Not
an eye
true.
out for it and just understand what you're signing.
That is not true. There's definitely prepayment penalty. I'm gonna let you know.
Okay,
I'm
so,
gonna let you
no,
know.
but it's kind
Not
of
for
gone out of
citizens.
vogue.
Citizens
Not for
doesn't
citizens,
charge you
not
a
for citizens
prepayment.
ever.
I
I've
have
been here
more.
too long.
Yeah, you're just used
I've
to it.
been
So
here too
that's
long.
it's a win for citizens over here.
Yeah.
Madeline has some very specific questions. I don't know if you guys see in the
Yes.
chat. I would let you and Christine kind of jump right in because you're both looking at the building's financials.
Yeah. And we both have different criteria.
Yes.
Um,
Hmm.
so, assessing a co-op's finances takes into account not only their reserves and their history of maintenance increases, which I look at, but it also just depends on the age of a co-op and what's been going on and what there is to maintain, right?
Yeah.
A co-op with a lot of landscaping, with a pretty large gym or a roof deck that's got barbecues, is going to have a much bigger budget and require a lot more maintenance, and I'm going to expect a lot more wear and tear than kind of a smaller building that just has, a small garden. There isn't like a magic number. You know, in terms of reserves, the older the building, the more reserves I want to see because there's just going to be more maintenance. Pre-war buildings are notorious for having not the best plumbing, not the best electric. So there's always going to be fixes for things like that. They're going to be constantly repainting. They're going to be constantly putting in, new carpeting or retiling, because, you know, you're talking about 100-year-old building. Um, you know,
That
so
happens in 20-year-old or 100-year-old buildings.
but
Mhm.
it's worse in a 100-year-old building. So in terms of
I'm gonna,
reserves,
I'll fight you on that another day.
okay, we
I live in
will.
new construction. I'm telling you, it's not. And I've seen so many
Oh,
deals. It's bad across. Things need maintaining. If you don't maintain them, that they fall apart. And things are built with the quality of material of new construction is so much
I
worse
agree.
than old
I
buildings.
agree with that. I agree
yeah,
with that
they
100%.
do.
The quality of new
Yeah.
construction is not the same.
Yeah. So they,
Um,
they move they move much faster and it shows. So in terms of reserves in an older building, I would like to see 20-25% of the budget of that year in reserves. Taking it into account, like some co-ops will have a huge reserve, but then you look and see what capital projects they're planning, and they've already planned to spend 1 million of their 1.5 million. So they don't really have 1.5 million, right? They have 500,000. So it will really depend. I do not like when a building relies too heavily on flip tax income.
I
Just
agree.
because last year, if you're a 150 unit building, just because last year you had 10 sales and you therefore had 50,000 in flip tax income does not mean every year you're going to have 10 or more sales. So I really don't like it when I see a budget that says, "Oh, we're 20,000 off our, target, but that's okay because last year we got 50,000 in flip tax revenue." I would prefer to see a balanced budget and then the flip tax revenue goes back into reserves as extra. That doesn't always happen, but that is what I would prefer to see.
I'm going to just tag along and basically echo everything that you just said. In terms of what the bank is looking for, they're looking for it currently, like right this very minute, is putting away 10% into reserves. So 10% of your operating income should be going into the reserves. It's going to increase to 15% in August, just as a general standard. If they're not doing that, we want to see a reserve study. Just a reserve study is something that they commission to basically say like, oh, everything is in tip-top shape, and here's why, and our decision not to fund our reserves at this level is justified because of XYZ. Um, so take that with what you will, but that's a document you can ask for during due diligence if you find that they're underfunding the reserves. And I just want to echo what Christine said. I've seen a lot of co-ops that are rather than raise maintenance or have a special assessment, they choose to bridge their gaps through a flip tax. And that is just, it's very inconsistent. Sales fall through. Sometimes, you might be counting on a December sale that ends up, for reasons outside of everyone's control, closes in January. And then you've just like destroyed your budget for the next year. And then everyone buying the building in the next year, or if you're selling your unit, you're going to have a harder time with your buyer getting financing. So it's just something to keep in mind, looking at those financials really, really carefully.
So I hope that answered your question. Madeline, do you have any
Probably
other
more than.
questions?
Yeah, Amy and I got a little too excited talking about that, I
I know,
think.
I was gonna say we're such
No, that
nerds.
was
I could
great. It
talk
was a
about it
great
all day.
question. Yeah, no, and I think you're really helping pull back the veil on a lot of things for people. I think that, it's overwhelming and scary, and they don't know what to ask. And so you guys have given them a really great place to start a conversation. Oh, and a little bit of knowledge to help, keep people in check. Like, oh, I know what I'm talking about here. I think that's the hardest thing, I think, and that's why we do these classes, guys, is to educate people because there's a lot of gatekeeping. There's a lot of things that are different from state to state. There's not one resource to get all this information. So that's why we do these classes. That's why we provide them online, and that's why we make ourselves available. So if anybody's looking to buy or sell right now, please even if you're not, but if you are, like, please reach out to us. We're happy to work with you and provide resources for you and get you on the right path because that's what we love doing. And I'm not going to give us a whole sales pitch, but me and Christine and Amy have worked on several deals together, and we're a great team. So please consider us or refer us to anybody looking to make a purchase or sale. So we're going to end it out because I don't see any other questions. I'm going to send a follow-up email tomorrow with some resources and yeah, end with our contact info. And so feel free to reach out to us. Anything you guys want to add?
No, just if anyone has any questions, call me. I love talking about this stuff.
Same, literally.
Same.
Yeah, I love talking about this. I like being able to help people make informed decisions, and really know their numbers so that they are confident when they're making those offers, and signing that initial paperwork, and that you go in knowing like this is gonna get done.
Great. I agree that you guys are both really good and really like what you do. And that's why you're so good at it, right? Because you should like what you do. So, okay, thanks for joining us. We're having another one about brownstones and townhouses in September. So enjoy your summer, but don't feel like just because we don't have another class right now, don't feel like you can't reach out. We're definitely working. It's just very busy. Okay. Thanks, everybody. Have a great night.
Thank you. Bye.